Well, g'day curd nerds. Today we're making a lactose-free cheese. Now I used lactose-free milk to make this cheese. This particular cheese is a Caerphilly, one of my go-to cheeses that never fail. So I quickly whipped that up. I'm only used 4 litres of milk, and I used a smaller mould to create this cheese. It's about 700 grams in weight, which is about 1.5 pounds, I think, roughly. And it is maturing well. Now this will be ready in 3 weeks' time to eat. But anyway, let's see how I made the cheese. So this is the type of milk I'm using. It's called Zymal. It's an Australian brand made by Paul's. So wherever you live, try and find a source of pasteurised, homogenised, lactose-free milk. The total fat rating for this milk is 3.6 grams per 100 millilitres. So it's about 3.6% fat. Anyway, the ingredients, I'm using 4 litres of whole milk or full cream milk, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of mesophilic culture, 1/2 a teaspoon of calcium chloride diluted in 60 ml of cool non-chlorinated water, 1/2 a teaspoon of liquid rennet, I'm using IMCU 200 rennet, and 1 tablespoon of non-iodized salt. And you'll need a little bit more salt for rubbing on the surface of the cheese as we press it. So we're going to bring the temperature up now of the milk. So I'm using a double boiler method. I've got a pot underneath this with a bit of water in it, and we're going to heat the milk to 32 degrees Celsius or 90 Fahrenheit. So we're at the right temperature now, and it's time to add the mesophilic culture. Just give that a little bit of a stir first. Now this is the first time I've ever used lactose-free milk, so I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, but at this stage we're going to add the mesophilic starter culture. So just sprinkle that over the surface of the milk. So I'm using a Mad Millie sachet there, just standard mesophilic. So I didn't wait for it to rehydrate or anything like that. I just give it a stir for about a minute. Anyway, as I was saying about this milk, this is the first time I've ever used this kind of milk. So I was not sure whether it would set a good curd or not. So it's a bit of an experiment at this stage until I actually saw some results. And that's partly the reason why I modified my standard 8-litre Caerphilly recipe down to 4 litres, because I didn't want to waste any milk. So we just make sure that that starter culture is mixed well through the milk. And we're going to cover that now, and we're going to let it rest for 30 minutes at the target temperature of 32 Celsius or 90 Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. And that will start to acidify not the lactose, because there's no lactose in this. It'll start to acidify the glucose and galactose, which is the remaining sugars left in the milk. So give that a good stir. And we're going to start to add the liquid ingredients now. So just a quick check of the temperature. And it looks pretty good. So it has crept up a couple of degrees, but that's not going to matter really when it comes to this cheese. So there's no heat on whatsoever now. The heat is off on the stove. So we're going to add the calcium chloride now to the milk. Just pour that in, and hopefully that will help strengthen the curd set because this is homogenized milk after all. So we give that a good stir for about a minute. Make sure that's well incorporated through the milk. And now we're going to add in the rennet. So I've diluted this rennet with non-chlorinated water. The reason we do that is because any chlorine in water inhibits the rennet action, so it won't coagulate properly. So give that a stir for no more than a minute to make sure that the rennet is thoroughly incorporated into your milk. So we don't want to stir too long because it's starting to set already. So we're just going to cover that now. And we're going to allow the milk to set for 40 minutes at the same temperature, 32 Celsius or 90 Fahrenheit. Now notice that I just stilled the milk there, stop it from moving around. That actually helps with the curd set. So I'm going to check for a clean break after 40 minutes. So I'm just doing the knife test, just put it in, see if it splits. And it's a bit of a sloppy break, it's not as clean as I'd like it to be. So I'm going to wait another 10 minutes. And this may not happen to you, depending on the type of rennet you're using. So I'm just going to put the lid back on and we'll wait for another 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, we're just going to check it. I'm going to check it with my finger this time. And a lot better curd break, so that's good. We're going to cut the curds into 6mm or 1/4 inch cubes. So I'll do the horizontals with my trusty curd cutter and do very fine cuts with my curd knife. And that will give me the cubes that I'm after. Okay. So I'm going to let the cubes heal for 5 minutes because I'm just not sure about this milk yet. Okay, we see a little bit of clear whey, so that's pretty good. So what we're going to do is slowly raise the temperature up to 33 degrees, which is 92 Fahrenheit. So I'm gently lifting the curds there. I'm not stirring vigorously, and I'm trying to cut any really large size ones down with the side of the spoon. So I'm being very gentle at this early stage, because what I did notice is that it was a bit of a sloppy cut, sloppy break. Anyway, so I stirred for 40 minutes and to prevent matting, and that's the size of the curd I ended up with. The whey is fairly yellow, it's not too creamy, so far so good. And I can make a fist with the curd and it sticks together, and then you can simply break it apart with your thumb so you know that your curd is cooked. Now if that didn't happen at this stage, you can do it for another stir for another 10 minutes and then try that again. So we're going to allow the curds to settle now for 5 minutes. That just makes it a little bit easier to drain off. And we're going to drain the curds through a cheesecloth lined colander. Just pour that straight through. And you can save the whey if you wish, but I already had some in the fridge. So not much I could do with it. So make sure you get it all out of the pot. Scrape it out with your clean hands. Okay, so the curds have still got a fair bit of liquid, a fair bit of whey in it. So allow that to drain for 10 minutes. So 10 minutes later, you can see that shrunk down quite a bit. And now it's ready to do a very basic cheddaring process because Caerphilly, the cheese we're making, is from the cheddar family of cheeses. So I'm just going to put that on my clean drainer there, which I had sanitized with vinegar earlier. And you just open up the cheesecloth and you should have one big curd mass. So we're going to cut the curds into 2.5cm or 1 inch thick slabs. And we're going to stack them on top of each other. Now I did find that it was very easy to cut through, so I didn't think it had actually drained enough. So I had to do a center cut as well. But I still stacked them on top of each other. They seemed to stack okay. They didn't break apart, so it wasn't too bad at this stage. So there we go, we've got it all stacked. So we come back about 10 minutes later, and we're going to turn the stack over again now. If they hadn't matted together, you may have to cut them again like I just did there. So just stack them on top of each other again, top to bottom. And that way some more whey will get expelled and you'll get the texture in the cheese that you're after. So after another 10 minutes, we're going to turn the stack over top to bottom again. There we go. So the cheddaring's complete, or very basic cheddaring, and what we're going to do now is mill the curds by breaking them into thumbnail size pieces into the same pot that we actually made the curds in the first place. So just breaking up each of the slabs into thumbnail size pieces and pop them into the pot. This helps when we go to add the salt in. So there wasn't a lot of whey left in the curds, which is good. Just shaking out the small bits there and giving the cheesecloth a good squeeze because we're going to need that a little bit later on. Okay, we're going to add our salt to it now. So it's 1 tablespoon of salt. May seem like a lot for this very small cheese, but Caerphilly is well known to be a very salty cheese. So I've just used under a tablespoon there. Didn't want it too salty because we're going to actually rub it with salt again in a minute. So once it's been salted, we're going to blend that through the curds very gently. You don't want any of the fats coming out of the curd. And you'll know if you're stirring too much is that the curds will start to weep and you'll see a creamy liquid start to be expelled. So I'm just basically tossing them in my hand. I'm not squeezing, I'm not doing anything silly like that. And just gently tossing it around until the salt's mixed. Okay, I've got a mould there. Now this is an 800 gram mould that I use for smaller cheeses. It's got a plastic follower as well. So I'm using the same cheesecloth that I drained it with. We actually sell this one in our shop. It's an 800 gram mould. So I'm just going to pop the cheesecloth in there and then I'm going to fill it with the salted curds. I'm trying to figure out how to do this best for the camera. Okay, so just filling up with the curds now. So at this stage, everything's going well, no problems at all. So we just press that down a little bit and gently pull the cheesecloth so there are no wrinkles in the sides of the cheese. Just give my hands a quick wash before we pop the follower on top. So before we put the follower on top, we actually fold the cheesecloth over the top of the cheese. And this prevents the follower from getting stuck as well, and it prevents any patterns that may get imprinted by the follower if it's got markings on it. So just fold that over, pop the follower on top, give it a press down. Okay, now it's time for pressing, so I'll get my trusty spring press out. Didn't quite fit, so I had to screw it up a bit. So I pop my 50 pound or 22 kilo spring in there, and we're going to press this at fairly lightly, so 5 kilograms, which is about 10 pounds, for 30 minutes initially. There we go. So 30 minutes later, we'll come back to this cheese and we'll remove it from the press, and we're going to take it out of the mold, and we're going to do something special to it now. Normally we'd just flip it over, redress it and put it in the press and press it for another period of time. But not so with this cheese. We actually salt the outside of the cheese. Now, just be careful at this stage because the cheese hasn't fully formed, so the curds may come apart. Depends on how heavily you pressed it. So we gently pull the cheesecloth off. There we go, it's not too bad. You can see some lines down the side of the cheese there where the cheesecloth was crinkled on the side when it was in the mold. So what we're going to do now is sprinkle just a very fine layer of salt on the top and give that a firm rub in. And then we're going to flip the cheese over and we're going to repeat that and do the same on the other side. So another layer of salt and then give that a sprinkle too. Give that a good rub. Okay, so then we're just going to redress the cheese now and we're going to put it back into the mold. Now if you feel that there's excess whey in the cheesecloth, give it a good squeeze. Here we go. There we go. So pushed it all the way down to the bottom and just fold over the cheesecloth again before you put the follower on top. So we're going to press this at the same weight, so 5 kilograms or 10 or 11 pounds. This time though for 1 hour. So I've only just slightly closed the spring to give me 5 kilograms of pressure. If you haven't got a press, then just find 5 kilograms of weight and plop it on top. Okay. So just put that aside and I'm going to take it out of the press again. And for the final pressing, we're going to take it out. The curds have consolidated a lot more now, which is great. That's what we want. So I'm just going to give the cheesecloth a good squeeze to make sure there's not a lot of whey in it. And this will help the cheese consolidate further in the future, in the next pressing. Okay, so flatten your cheesecloth out again, and we're going to do the same things we did before. We're going to rub a layer of salt on top, and then flip it over, and do the same again, another layer of salt. So this is what gives Caerphilly its hard rind that it's well known for, and also the creamy paste in the middle of the cheese. So because the surface is so heavily salted, it forms a natural rind very quickly, usually within the first week, because the cheese only takes 3 weeks to mature. Okay, so pop that in the mold, fold the cheesecloth over the top again. Just make sure there's no wrinkles. And then we put the follower on top, press that down, and then press it again. So as I mentioned, this is the final pressing. So we're going to press at about 7.5 kilos or 15 pounds for 16 hours. So 16 hours later, and many cheeses, you can see that in the background there, but that's the story of another video. Anyway, we'll take this one out of the press. Okay, I'm going to air dry this now. So the curds are fully consolidated, made a nice smooth surface all the way around. Just got a maturing box there. I'm just going to air dry on the cheese mat with the lid off. I only put the lid on it to stop any flies getting into it, but you leave the lid off and we're going to air dry that for a few days. So we're going to turn the cheese several times a day for even drying, and then once it's air dry, we're going to mature it at 13 degrees Celsius at 80 to 85% humidity for 3 weeks, turning it several times a week. Anyway, over to Gav.
So
The process of Caerphilly is really neither here nor there. It was to prove the fact that you can make cheese out of lactose-free milk, and that Zymal milk that I used and you saw in the video. It did work. As you can see though, it did crack, not crack, the curds kind of fractured a little bit after I cut them, but I persisted and we made a very nice little cheese out of it. Anyway, it just goes to show that all those who are lactose intolerant should not have any issues with this cheese, because it's got the enzyme lactase in it, which has broken up the lactase into its two component sugars, glucose and galactose. So it's readily easy to eat for people with a lactose intolerant condition. Now the proof in the pudding will be in the taste test. I will be inviting my daughter, who has issues with some dairy, and we're going to get her to eat it during the taste test. I don't know when I'll schedule that up, but we'll keep a piece. If not, I'll do a taste test myself. So that'll happen in about 3 weeks' time. Anyway, don't forget that you can make this cheese using our hard cheese kit. Just pop over to littlegreenworkshops.com.au and you can subscribe to the channel to get more cheesy videos like this one. Thanks for watching, Curd Nerds, and we'll see you next time.